Now on to The Late Show and Performance present one of the most controversial court cases of the 1970s, beginning in 10 minutes with a drama based on the trial transcripts. First, Jonathan Dimbleby sets the scene for the Trials of Oz.
Imagine the Old Bailey, a criminal trial. 3 young men charged with a variety of offences under the Obscene Publications Act. There's a fierce cross-examination. And at issue, a strip cartoon starring Rupert Bear. Bizarre it may seem, but it happened in the longest obscenity trial held in this country. For 6 weeks in the summer of 1971, the nation was gripped by an extraordinary legal drama about sexual revolution and pornography, individual freedom and censorship. Billed by the press as the underground versus the establishment, the case provoked passionate national debate, and it said even more letters to the Times than the Suez Crisis. It was known simply as the Oz trial. Tonight we will revisit the Oz trial in the form of a major drama, and we'll follow that with a discussion about the issues raised by it with some of the key protagonists, including the 3 defendants themselves. Some of the material in this programme is explicit, both in language and in imagery, and it may well be offensive, therefore, to some people. However, it is a faithful record of the time. To start off, though, a brief reminder of the events which led up to the trial.
Oz was the most gorgeous, hallucinatory magazine experience you could possibly have. I don't think any magazine has ever looked like it before or since.
It was something quite exciting when it first appeared. It wasn't just the sort of druggy side, which was exciting too, but it was all the sort of let's make love and all that sort of thing. You know, it was all quite an exciting idea in those days.
Oz emerged in the early 60s, a student magazine founded in Sydney, Australia, hence the name. Inspired by one Richard Neville, it was an anarchic mix of student politics, juvenile cartoons, and sexual innuendo. But it irritated the authorities. A cover showing 3 editors urinating against a wall was prosecuted for obscenity in 1963. The editors were tried and found guilty. Although they were acquitted on appeal, Richard Neville decided to escape Australian morality for that of Britain. He arrived in London in 1966.
Well, that's 70 Clarendon Road, Holland Park, which is where I arrived about 25 years ago, quarter of a century ago. One midnight, moved in with my sister Jill, who was living here. One of the stories that I most remember about the early days of Oz was, of course, the Evening Standard calling and wanting a paragraph about the history of the Australian Oz. This ended up with a young reporter, Mary Kenny, coming to interview me and Louise. We'd just been shopping. Louise looked particularly glamorous. The cameraman was on the floor, photographing her in a new miniskirt. I panicked at the sight of my first reporter in London, thinking, my God, how can I make myself interesting? Give a good copy. And, of course, started waxing lyrically on how we were going to start a magazine that would shake the city walls. Mary Kenny went off and wrote it, and the next day the phones began going. The birth of Oz.
The first London Oz surfaced in 1967, a time of what may now seem self-indulgent cliches about sexual and political liberation. But for that minority who thought that a new dawn was imminent, Oz was a beacon of hope in a repressed and authoritarian age.
What we were always hearing in the mid-60s was, okay, swinging London. What was swinging London? It was product. It was the music of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. It was Mary Quant fashions. But what were the ideas behind this change of spirit, behind, you know, pop art and behind flared trousers and just a different way of dancing and moving and smoking marijuana? What was the thinking behind these processes?
It cost 2 and 6. For that you got passion against Vietnam and passion for cannabis. Along with civil rights, there was much about music, travel and food. The contributors were appropriately diverse.
I can't remember what I wrote, and I can't find it, and of course, like everything else, it was illegible, so I'd have to scrutinize every page for about 12 issues before I could find it. I'm pretty sure it was rubbish, but I can't remember.
Richard Neville was soon joined by 2 other editors. Jim Anderson, trained as a lawyer, but now an aspiring novelist. And a future millionaire, Felix Dennis, then a rock drummer who knew a bit about business.
1,000 businessmen doing this all over London right now, and it's no different where we are. Come on, go away, let's get on with the newspaper, my friend. Go and photograph Richard Neville. I don't want to go and look into your stupid TV camera.
Right, so this is 52 Prince Star Road. This is my chauffeur, Dennis. And these were Oz's first commercial premises. We used to call it the Fish and Chip Bar. It was run like pretty much like a hippie drop-in centre. And I suppose you could say this was the corporate headquarters of the Oz publishing empire.
Oz formed part of a vigorous underground press that had sprouted in the basements of alternative London. Produced by dedicated but transient enthusiasts, Oz was not the least radical, but certainly the most chic of them all.
It was an extraordinary object. It was almost a flag. It was never the same 2 issues running. It kept changing formats. Sometimes it was square, sometimes it was long and thin. Sometimes when the budget seemed to be high, it was glossy, sometimes it was newsprint. It had this amazing habit of being almost illegible, overprinting text with images. It was obviously designed to be the kind of magazine that not only would your parents not want to read, but they couldn't read.
Oz was surreal. It did experiment, and not least with sex. Sex in abundance, in all forms and without inhibition. But this was not sex as pleasure, but sex as politics. More especially, sex to shock.
They used sex as a weapon. They used sex to frighten the establishment. Sex was a metaphor for revolution and rebellion. If the establishment hadn't been shocked by it, they would have found something else instead. Sex was a kind of Molotov cocktail to throw at the authorities.
It was edition 28, the Schoolkids Oz, published in 1970, that would end up in the Old Bailey. After an advertisement inviting young readers to edit their own issue of Oz, some 20 teenagers were selected by the editors and given a more or less free hand to make their own magazine. Among them, Charles Shah Murray.
I'd told my parents that I was going to get involved in this, and they just sort of thought, oh, well, that's nice. Every boy should have a hobby. I wrote all the rock stuff, and dreadful it was too. Other people wrote about, you know, how their school ROTC training would come in very handy for storming embassies, you know, planning campaigns to take over the American embassy, which I think shows how optimistic we were.
And there was another journalist to be, Dejan Sujic.
There were really 2 kinds of Oz school kid. There were the youthfully ambitious and the bona fide hippies. And the youthfully ambitious, I suppose, were looking at the idea of getting into a magazine which seemed to be doing interesting things. And I suppose I was one of the youthfully ambitious.
Much of the issue was devoted to a tedious variety of articles agitating for school reform and, crudely enough, against schoolmasters. It was the illustrations that would provoke the criminal law, and especially the cartoon which featured Rupert Bear, a sexually aggressive collage derived from the work of occult American artist Robert Crumb, but starring this favourite children's character. The cover was to prove equally outrageous.
We made that decision on that cover at extreme high speed. I know that it was done very late at night. I can remember being slightly concerned about it. I'm quite sure that the whole decision was made in less than 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes had an enormous influence on the rest of my life and of Richard Neville and Jim Anderson's life. It was an ordinary day, and they'd raided us before. But this time I knew it was serious because they began carrying the filing cabinets out. It wasn't just taking the back issues. I remember me standing outside holding up a big sign outside 52 Princedale Road as the police carried everything away with a quickly handwritten sign saying, you know, Oz, business as usual.
It was not business as usual. Before long, the 3 Oz editors were in the dock at the Old Bailey, charged under the obscenity laws and with conspiring to corrupt the morals of young persons. And now for the trial itself. Remarkable as it may seem on occasion, the dramatized version of the case that we're about to see is drawn faithfully from the official record of the proceedings. And as one who sat through much of the trial as a reporter, I can vouch for the fact that it captures the original atmosphere and tone with uncanny precision. And, I should say, the language that was used as well. It's explicit, and for some, therefore, it will be offensive. Here it is.
Prisoners at the bar, you are charged with conspiracy to produce a magazine, to wit, Oz number 28, containing divers nude, indecent, and sexually perverted articles, cartoons, drawings, and illustrations, with intent thereby to debauch and corrupt the morals of young persons within the realm, and to arouse and implant in their minds lustful and perverted desires. Richard Clive Neville, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
James Anderson, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Felix Dennis, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On the second count, you are charged with publishing an obscene magazine.
Yes, Mr. Leary.
My lord. Members of the jury, I appear to prosecute in this case. The first defendant, Mr. Richard Neville, will represent himself, and my learned friend, Mr. John Mortimer, QC, appears for the other two accused men. This trial concerns a monthly magazine, Oz, number 28, the Schoolkids issue. It deals with homosexuality, it deals with lesbianism on the front cover. It deals with sadism, with perverted sexual practices, and with drug taking. You will, having read it through, have to ask yourselves, does such a magazine, in fact, tend to deprave and corrupt those who are likely to read it?
This is a case about dissent. Dissenters today wear long hair and colourful clothes, dream their dreams of another world in small bed sitting rooms in Notting Hill Gate. You'll probably hear a lot in this case about sex and something about drugs. But we'd like you to hear about the basic beliefs of the people who edit this magazine, about their impatience with what they consider to be the hypocrisies of conventional attitudes, about their anxiety to build what they think, what we may not think, to be a better world. Members of the jury, we are all of us totally entitled to disagree with their views. What this case is about is whether they're entitled to disagree with us.
In an earlier edition of Oz, in February 1970, the editors published this advertisement. Some of us at Oz are feeling old and boring, so we invite any of our readers who are under 18 to come and edit the April issues. You will receive no money except expenses. You will enjoy almost complete editorial freedom. The prosecution's first witness, a young man then aged 15, named Vivian Berger, We'll tell you that he contacted the offices of Oz in Notting Hill Gate and thereafter went to Richard Neville's basement flat again in Notting Hill Gate, together with about 25 other young persons. Now, when you come to listen to that young man giving his evidence, members of the jury, treat what he says with care. He is what we would call an accomplice.
What were your motives in offering as your contribution to Schoolkids issue the cartoon of Rupert the Bear, which we're going to hear so much about?
I think that, looking back on it, I subconsciously wanted to shock your generation, to portray us as a group of people who are different from you in moralistic attitudes. And also, it seemed to me just very funny, like anything else that makes fun of sex.
You said you did it to shock an older generation. What is the relevance of Rupert the Bear as a figure or symbol?
Well, Rupert would probably be known to many generations as a kind of innocent young character who figures in magical fairy tales, whereas here he's just doing what every other normal human being does.
Was it part of your intention to show that there's a more down-to-earth side to childhood than some grown-ups are prepared to think?
Oh, yes. This is the kind of drawing that goes around every classroom every day in every school.
Do you really mean that?
Yes, I do mean it. Maybe I was portraying obscenity, but I don't think I was being obscene myself.
The only other witness to be called by the prosecution is Detective Inspector Luff, an officer from the Obscene Publications Squad at Scotland Yard.
I cautioned Mr. Dennis and Mr. Anderson and informed them that the facts would be reported to the Director of Public Prosecutions, firstly in relation to obscene material, and secondly in relation to offences under the Post Office Act. Mr. Dennis said, "Wow, be sure you get that right. Okay, so you'll get us under the Post Office Act, not the other one." Then he added, "Right on."
Did you understand him to mean right on?
Well, not right on, W-R-I-T-E, but a revolutionary expression, right on. This is what I understand the remark to mean.
I see.
Inspector Luff, I've lost track of the number of times that you've seized various publications from the offices of Oz, and I was wondering if you could remind me on how many occasions you have raided our offices.
I'd have to do some research to answer that, absolutely.
Yeah, but you could tell me roughly how many, couldn't you?
I would think half a dozen times.
And as well as taking all our copies of the magazine, you also took such things as filing cabinets, pictures on the wall, and so forth.
I took such documents and such magazines as I considered would be material and relevant to any proceedings which might be brought at the time.
Yes. At one stage, did you actually say to one of the defendants, Mr. Dennis, that you believe Oz ought to be closed down?
I don't think I used those words, but I might have done. I certainly made it clear that I didn't like Oz publications.
Do you think that the underground press in this country has a legitimate right to survive? To exist?
And do you have any objections as to whether they should be allowed to publish as a whole?
Well, as a whole, I can't comment. But as far as Oz is concerned, it is undesirable, I think, from the family point of view. When they attack society and try to change it, then yes, I do have objections.
Well, Inspector, in preparing this case, you must have spent a great deal of time reading Oz 28. I was wondering, do you yourself feel that you've been depraved and corrupted by the experience?
When one considers the magazine as a whole, I think perhaps there has been a general dirtying of the mind.
Have you, in the course of your investigations, Mr. Luff, made any inquiries as to the sort of people among whom the magazine is circulated?
We've confined it to the area produced in court.
Ah, yes, let's look at the subscription list that you seized from the office. Begins with Mr. Richard Ingram's, editor of Private Eye.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the magazine Private Eye? And you weren't supposing that anyone working for that magazine might be liable to be corrupted by anything that might appear in Oz? You heard the name of Mr. Kenneth Tynan at all?
Yes, I have.
And you weren't supposing... No, I won't ask that question. He's a well-known writer and journalist, isn't he?
I suppose so.
Mr. John Gordon of the Sunday Express?
Yes, sir.
Not exactly a pillar of the permissive society.
This is a trial of criminal charges of some gravity. This is not a theatre for public performance. I'll say no more for the moment. But if this laughter goes on, this court has more than adequate powers to deal with any situation that arises. Yes, Mr. Mortimer.
Manfred Mann, the pop singer Jonathan Aitken, the journalist, Mr. William Burroughs, the author, the Atticus column of the Sunday Times, Mr. Richard Crossman, editor of the New Statesman, former cabinet minister. Heard of him?
Yes, sir.
Christopher Loeb, the poet, Gerald Scarfe, the cartoonist, Mr. John Lennon, a well-known singer, the publicity manager of Faber and Faber. Impressive, isn't it? And yet when you answered Mr. Neville's question about Oz closing down, you said that you might wish that to happen because, in your view, it attacks society, didn't you?
Only I didn't use those words, but if, since you put it if, in my opinion, of course my opinion isn't worth very much, but if a school kids issue...
Now, look, just listen to me. Just answer the question. Didn't you, in answer to Mr. Neville's question about Oz closing down, say that in your view it attacks society? Didn't you use that phrase?
Yes, I did.
And isn't that the real basis for police hostility to this magazine?
Sir, you asked the question as to why I used the word hostility, but the basis for police action in these proceedings came about as a result of members of the public contacting us as police officers. Police officers. Police officers. Police officers.
Now, Mr. Neville, you are the first defendant. You may open your case.
Thank you, my lord. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you may be wondering why one of us is defending himself. This is because I have no wish to hide behind the wigs and gowns of the legal profession. I believe that I should try and talk to you directly and tell you how and why we publish Oz. Now, Oz is not destructively anti-society. Oz is a sounding board for people with new things to say and nowhere else to say them. So, for example, there's been a homosexual Oz, edited by homosexuals for the usual Oz readership. There's been a women's liberation Oz, edited by Germaine Greer, a women's liberationist, and distributed to the usual Oz readership. This edition was edited by school kids, but was intended for the normal Oz readership. Now, one of the reasons that we invited adolescents to edit this special issue of Oz was that we were interested in what they had to say. They form one group in society who want to see changes made and who are denied a voice in newspapers and on television. That's where Oz comes in as an alternative voice. Do you remember the fairy tale about the emperor with no clothes? How the emperor paraded the streets naked, deluding himself that he had a suit of fine new clothes, and how the only one of his subjects with the courage and honesty to expose him was a young person within his realm. In many ways, our society today is naked. Obscenely naked at that. The real obscenities of this world, the causes of true depravity and corruption, are things such as poverty, war, homelessness, and greed. And yet this trial is brought by the leaders of our obscene society. Not only does our emperor deny that he is naked, but he drags his young accusers into court on the charge that they are corrupters and debauchers. My lord, I am ready to answer that charge under cross-examination.
Yes, certainly.
Mr. Neville, we've heard a lot about the political views expressed in Oz, but some readers of your magazine are just going to flip through the political pages in search of the real smut, aren't they?
Well, the readers that you're talking about, who we can perhaps call the Macintosh Brigade, can find much better sustenance in a place like Soho, so I'm never completely overawed by this criticism.
Yes, but you're thinking only of the Macintosh Brigade. I'm thinking of school children, see? Who can't get up to Soho, can they, easily, during term time?
No, possibly not.
But who might see a copy of the magazine on sale at the local bookstore and have it catch their eye.
Well, my reply to that, Mr. Leary, is that there are much more realistic photographs on the covers of Penthouse, Playboy, Mayfair, and so on, which are also at local newsagents and even at W.H. Smith's, and much more likely to catch the eye of young people primarily interested in sex.
Yes, but have you ever seen a Penthouse cover or a Playboy cover? with a girl wearing an artificial male phallus, a dildoll as it's called.
Let's call it an imitation male penis.
The word male is actually unnecessary, Your Lordship.
Would you please look on page 14 of your magazine? Here's an article written by one of your contributors, which suggests that people should couple in the streets if they feel like it. Is that right?
Yes.
And from the editorial standpoint, a good thing?
I don't ever...
Enlightening?
I don't think that...
Copulation in public, worthy or unworthy?
Copulation in the street is, I think, a very unrealistic demand.
Would you deal with its worthiness or otherwise?
Its worthiness.
Something to be encouraged or condemned. You follow me, don't you?
Well, I've already made it clear. I don't think the idea is a useful idea.
I know, but that's not the answer to my question. If it were to happen tomorrow, would you be in favour of it?
I'd be against it in the City of London.
Yes. Meaning that you'd be for it outside the City of London?
Well, I can imagine a situation in some sort of lyrical grove with the sun and the sea, perhaps by a beach in Spain, where if people wanted to copulate in public, I'd have no objections.
Look at the cartoon and the article on page 10. Now, they make the nasty suggestion, don't they, that some teachers get a sadistic thrill out of caning pupils.
Well, there are many groups in this country involved in attempts to reform the school discipline system. And however distasteful it may seem, this is a view that an increasing number of people hold.
What about the illustration at the top of page 8, Mr. Neville? How does that add to the article printed there? The boy there has got a meat hook in his right hand, hasn't he?
Yes, that's what it looks like.
In his left hand is a rolled copy of your magazine Oz.
That's right.
In the same position as an erect penis would be, if that was his penis.
Well, quite honestly, Your Lordship, until you just pointed it out, I'd not noticed it.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. I'd never thought of comparing holding the magazine with an erection.
Hadn't you?
No, I hadn't.
I see. Very well.
Just turn to the small ads on page 36. Look down the classified column, the adult review. No box numbers, no forwarding fees. This little blue book is a must for all way out adult gear, do you see?
Yes, I see.
Kinky?
Well, I'm not partial to the use of that word myself.
Well, then use your own.
What's the matter now?
Kinky is a word which the witness doesn't like.
Which advertisement are you looking at?
Oh, my lord, the one which starts the adult review.
Oh, so sorry. I was looking at voyeurs, homosexuals, lesbians.
Oh, my lord, sorry. Rubber gear, men dressed as maids, leather gear, all perversions.
No, all aspects of human sexual behaviour which are rather sad, yes.
Because they're pandering to the diseased mind, aren't they?
They're pandering, if you like, to people who are an unfortunate and often victimised minority. You know, it's just that we have a point of view that lesbians and homosexuals and other erotic minorities, to use that phrase, which I think is a good phrase, ought not to lead unhappy and repressed lives. I hold that particular point of view, so if this advertisement aids them in finding some sort of sexual fulfillment within society's limitations, I have no objection.
Submissive male with guilt complex seeks dominant female. Can't you see the kinkiness in that particular advertisement? And there's the perversion carried all the way from liking to dress the man up as a maid and getting him to go down on all fours on the ground and woman with a whip, and you've got the classic sexual situation, haven't you?
Well, I think you're reading Fanny Hill into a two-line advertisement.
You see? How about this, then? The homosexual Oz, multiracial male kisses. Only 25 left of the most controversial Oz ever, selling in Earl's Court for £3 each. The suggestion there being that it was at a premium in the Earl's Court area, is that right?
Yes, that's the suggestion.
The Earl's Court area being famous or infamous, whichever way one likes to put it, for male perverts.
It's famous for Australians.
Yes, it wasn't Australians that were rushing out to buy the homosexual Oz because they were Australians, was it?
Well, I probably do remember it selling for £3 in Earl's Court, but I certainly do not attach anything sinister to the fact. I mean, I always thought homosexuals were mainly centred around Piccadilly.
Oh, isn't it Piccadilly for drugs, Earl's Court for queers?
Well, certainly you've been in London longer than I have, Mr. Leary, and you know what you're saying, I'm sure, so I accept that. But isn't it Piccadilly for both?
Forgive me, but you mustn't ask counsel questions. He's only doing his duty.
I have no further questions.
Very well. Mr. Neville, do you wish to call any witnesses?
I'd like to call Mr. George Melly. Melly.
I'd like to affirm.
The witness wishes to affirm, my lord.
And why is that?
I'm an atheist.
I see. Very well, then, you may affirm.
I, George Melly, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
George, you are a jazz singer. You've written books about popular culture. You are the Observer's film critic, and you were honoured as Critic of the Year last year for 1970. I want to ask you firstly about how our society copes with new cultural movements.
I believe that each generation has its moment of revolt, when it sees society, probably from a rather adolescent point of view, as totally fallible, totally wrong. It is at this point that in the past, those who choose to make money out of pop culture move in and package and exploit whatever it is that particular moment in pop history has thrown up and turn it into merchandise. That's why I called the book I wrote on the subject Revolt into Style, because each pop movement seems to me to begin with a moment of revolt, which is then packaged and turned into style.
And is our generation any different?
Well, it seems to me that in the last year or two, the generation which is now in revolt has begun to learn how previously they'd been turned into money and shares and merchandise, and are beginning to dig in their heels a bit harder to resist it, learning ways around it, sticking to their guns.
What part does Oz play in this process?
Oz is an organ which seeks to probe and see what society is really all about. At 45, it is for me not the most authoritative newspaper in the world, but I find it interesting and I learn from it what people younger than myself are thinking. In talking to members of your generation, I find them to be less guilty, less uncertain, less miserable, less tormented about sex than my generation was.
I wonder if you'd kindly open the magazine at pages 8 and 9. You see the cartoon and the four-letter words. Don't you find that regrettable, the deliberate impoverishment of the vocabulary?
Well, that is not an Oz phenomenon. I was an able seaman many years ago, and these words aren't new to my ears.
But do you find it adds anything whatever to this magazine to see the word cunt in capital letters printed 4 times?
I mean, one swears if one hits one's finger, because one is relieved if one is feeling oppressed. Swearing can be very relieving. I dare say everyone here has sworn at some time or other for that very reason.
Of course, we don't swear in front of your children, do you?
Certainly.
Yes, but you don't unless there's some reason for it. You don't use foul language, do you?
Don't use what, sir?
Foul language?
Well, you define foul language as 4-letter words, do you?
Well, words like cunt and bollocks, yes.
Well, for me, in their place, they're perfectly acceptable words.
Mr. Melly, I'll give you a chance to think about that.
I don't need it. Yes, I would use these words.
What, in front of you? Would you call your 8 or 10-year-old daughter a little cunt?
I don't think she is one, but I might easily refer to a politician as one.
Yes, but in front of her?
I'm afraid so. You know, lots of people do that sort of thing. Well, you can look absolutely amazed by it if you like. But I assure you, lots of people use 4-letter words without shame, and these words have lost a great deal of their ability to shock.
You're giving us your opinion.
Well, that's what I'm here for.
You're a man who freely discusses all sorts of progressive thoughts with his family, are you?
You're trying to make me out to be some sort of progressive NW1 monster. I do move around. I sing. I meet all sorts of people. And most people quite enjoy funny stories on the subject of sex. Even Malcolm Muggeridge admits it's a subject well worth treating humorously. I think, publish everything. Free people and let us see what they're really made of. And I cannot believe the end result is not a freer and more beautiful person than someone who has to pass it around under a desk. That's my general standard, sir.
Yes. Well, if you really believe the more openness, the better, is there anything wrong with the article on page 28, which discusses oral sex attractively?
No, there isn't. I don't believe cunnilingus can do actual harm if you believe entirely that sexuality is a wide thing in which one can do a large number of things as long as it doesn't hurt the opposite partner.
For those of us who did not have a classical education, what do you mean by this word cunnilingus?
I shall try to use better-known expressions in future. Perhaps I'm a little inhibited by the architecture. Sucking. Or blowing, your lordship. Going down. And if I remember, gobbling is another one. Oh, and an expression I remember from my naval days is yodeling in the canyon.
will call Caroline Coon.
I'm sure most of us have seen you on television, Miss Coon. I certainly have.
Caroline, you are the founder of Release, an organization that helps young people with drugs problems. Can you tell us what your opinion is of the coverage of drugs issues in Oz?
I think that in the long run, Oz gives a very balanced approach to drug taking. It provides accurate information on drugs in a language that the people who take drugs can understand. I think the underground newspapers have had a very substantial effect in preventing a rather serious epidemic of heroin use in this country. See, heroin, in the law, is equated with cannabis, and we in Release believe that a lot of young people experimenting with cannabis, believing and finding it not dangerous, might therefore be led on to believe that heroin was equally harmless. We believe the attitude Oz and the other underground newspapers take to these hard drugs has stopped the increase in hard drug use by young people in this country.
Miss Cohen, you've had some experience of people using drugs as substitutes for drugs, but some children, you can't stop experimenting with every cough mixture if they think they're going to get a kick out of it. That's right, isn't it?
What stops uninformed experimentation with drugs is when the young person is given the facts.
Yes, if they've been told it's dangerous, if they heed the warning. But children being what they are, sometimes they're going to think it's a load of stuff and nonsense, aren't they?
Well, you couldn't have hit the nail on the head better, really. If young people are told this time and again by school teachers or the authorities, they might dismiss the advice as just stuffy nonsense. The whole point about Oz is that it's young people talking to their peers, so you're not so likely to dismiss it as stuffy nonsense if it comes from your own contemporaries.
Let's deal with cannabis, for an instance. Cannabis, so they tell me, can be a pleasurable experience sometimes when smoked.
Yes, it's believed to be.
And people writing about their pleasurable experiences can only encourage others to experiment, can they not?
Well, almost without exception, the government reports on drugs say that cannabis can be a pleasurable experience.
I'm afraid I must take issue with you over this. If this country wished to legalize cannabis, it would have either to get special dispensation from the World Health Organization or leave it, wouldn't it?
Yes, but one expects that a satisfactory situation could be negotiated.
Of course, in a large number of Middle Eastern countries which have much more experience of cannabis than, say, Australia, the penalties for pushers in particular are very much more severe than in this country.
Yes, they are.
The death penalty is still operative in at least 5 Middle Eastern countries for pushers of cannabis.
Is it true that in Saudi Arabia, if a person is caught stealing, he would have his hands cut off? Did you know that?
Yes. I was actually in Riyadh when 7 thieves were in hospital after having their hands publicly severed.
Do you think that there's a great deal for this country to learn from the sentencing policies of those Middle Eastern countries?
I've already tried to make it clear.
I think the point has been made.
No further questions, my lord.
Thank you very much, Miss Coon. You've lightened a dark and very dull afternoon. Tomorrow morning, Mr. Mortimer, you can begin the case, Mr. Anderson.
Silence and be upstanding.
James Anderson, we've heard about your background as a lawyer. What made you become a barrister?
I was very young at the time, and it was my parents' idea of a good thing that I should become a lawyer. And of course, personally, I was very interested in the legal profession, or at least in the concepts of truth and justice, which I thought that the profession upheld.
In that case, why did you leave it?
Because over the years I became bored and disillusioned. I spent my early years in the Central Criminal Courts as a judge's associate. I was upset at the way witnesses were browbeaten by barristers, and the hypocrisy of certain judges led me to believe that the truth was not something which the courts valued very highly.
Where were these courts?
In Sydney, Your Lordship. I suppose I was really reacting to the adversary system, where you have two sides opposing each other in court, both trying to win their case by exaggerating their case and scoring cheap points from the other side. I felt in this environment that the truth was unlikely to come out.
No further questions, thank you.
Yes, I'd just like to read to you from page 4 of Oz number 28. This Oz has been put together with the help and inspiration of about 20 people, all 18 or under, mostly still at school, who came from various parts of London and England in answer to our appeals for injections of youthful vigor in our aging veins. Oz was hit with its biggest dose of creative energy for a long time. Have a look at the Rupert Bear strip, Youthful Genius. Did you write this, Mr. Anderson?
Yes, I did.
And is it still your opinion that Vivian Burger's cartoon of Rupert Bear is the work of youthful genius?
Yes, I think it's an extremely clever and funny idea.
Does it amount to youthful genius?
Well, maybe I was a little bit generous in my
The
praise.
youthful genius set to work by snipping out of the Rupert annual the head of the bear, that's right?
Yes.
Already drawn for him.
Yes.
Where lies the genius?
I think it's in the juxtaposition of the two ideas. The childhood symbol of innocence.
Making Rupert Bear fuck?
Yes.
Is that what you consider youthful genius?
Yes. I thought it was extraordinary. Even brilliant.
Extraordinary it may be, but it's not genius, is it? Now just look at this cover. You see the girl on the extreme left wearing a male penis, a penis strapped to her?
Yes.
Nice?
It's just a dildo.
Yes, of course it is, but is it nice?
Well, it's beautifully drawn.
Do you regard the erect male organ as nice?
I consider it a perfectly normal part of human anatomy.
Don't you agree that it's clearly indecent?
No, it's not indecent in the least.
What?
I don't find it indecent in the least.
Do you find anything indecent?
Well, yes, I find lots of things
just
indecent.
Name one thing. You said many things. Just name one.
Well, there's nothing here to help. I think if someone urinated in front of me, perhaps I might find that indecent.
Well, what happens to you each time you leave a public house after a drink and you go to the urinal attached to the public house? Is that being indecent?
Well, not in the least. But to urinate in a courtroom is a different matter.
Ah, is it because you were once a barrister that you find it indecent for somebody to pass water in a courtroom?
No, it's just that it's the wrong place for passing water.
Ah, but there's a lady passing water. See on page 28. Now, since you quoted an example, a man passing water as being something indecent, do ladies fall into the same class?
The action depicted is a very difficult thing for a lady. This is a satirical drawing by a very famous cartoonist. I don't see how you can draw any parallel.
Well, is it indecent?
Well, not in the least.
Well, why is it then that the lady who appears to be watering her cactus is doing so with her own urine, and the cactus is not really a cactus, but one of your phallic symbols because it's drawn the shape of the erect male penis? Now, I ask you again, do you consider that an indecent drawing?
Well, no, I don't. I consider it very humorous, quite savage in its context.
I agree that it's savage. It's savagely indecent.
The defence now proposes to call, with your lordship's permission, a number of expert witnesses who will testify from their experience that this edition of Oz magazine could in no way cause harm to any persons of whatever age who happened to read it. First witness is Dr. Michael Schofield of Cambridge University, a social psychologist, member of the government's advisory committee on drug dependence, and author of a leading study on the sexual behavior of young people.
I can think of plenty of things that might cause surprise and shock, perhaps, but not harm. I sincerely believe that were it not for the activities of the police, this edition of Oz would have been forgotten a very long time ago. I think, on balance, I would consider this a good magazine. It has a number of beneficial features, which I personally would like to see incorporated in many a school magazine. It's rather a pity that the cartoons have been brought into prominence. The text matter about the school system is basically so good.
Would you please turn to the cartoons on page 16, dealing with the fabulous furry freak brothers. Now, the first character is disgusted because he and his companions have run out of cannabis.
Yes.
And one of them is told to go out and score us a lid.
Yes.
And the character in the next cartoon is saying that the only place he knows to score weed at that time of night is Rip-Off Park.
Oh, forgive me, but Isn't it a fair inference from the first cartoon that those three characters there all take us from time to time of dangerous drugs?
I think that would be reasonable.
3 drug addicts.
Well, not necessarily addicts, but 3 people who take illegal drugs.
Yes, your lordship is correct. So one of them goes off into Rip-Off Park, and there he finds 2 genuine further drug addicts. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
And then there appears 2 flick knives, and his last $15 are stolen from the money with which he was going to buy the drugs.
That would be robbery, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And then the robbers themselves are robbed by the Rip-Off Park pig fuckers. Then there's a depiction of enormous violence. The word slice, I assume, indicating the use of a knife.
Yes.
And when the original drug taker comes upon the scene, question mark over his head in the form of a balloon, he sees at least 2 characters apparently dead with knives through their chests, and in the final cartoon, the character's saying he couldn't find any cannabis, but he found some smack. Do you know what smack is?
Heroin.
And a bunch of yellows and reds.
These are pep pills of some sort.
Pep pills of some sort? And 16 switchblade knives and a couple of .32 automatics, so he's done quite well out of the evening, hasn't he?
He has, yes, but only in an ironic sense.
And the characters who sent him out to get some grass are rewarded in the result by not only smack and a bunch of pep pills, but an armory of weapons.
But they've been rewarded in rather a fortuitous way. The whole point is that they're interested in pot, not in violence.
Life is often fortuitous, Doctor. Now let me quote to you from this music review on page 22. Keith Relf in Friends described it as straightforward fuck music. That's okay, I've got the first album. I'd love to meet a chick who could fuck like Led Zeppelin 1, but she'd wear me out in a week. Now, is music often the accompaniment to sexual activity?
Yes. I believe that Shakespeare put it rather more aesthetically.
Oh, a good deal more aesthetically, Doctor.
You were going to tell us, Doctor, how Shakespeare put straightforward fuck music.
Well, I think I was really going to comment, if music be the food of love, play on.
Can you remember the rest of that Shakespearean line?
I can't, I'm sorry.
What a pity. The rules of evidence don't allow me to remind you.
Yes, they do, Mr. Mortimer. How does Shakespeare go on?
Give me excess of it.
This is a courtroom, not a theatre.
Now then, will you turn your attention to the Rupert Bear cartoon on pages 14 and 15? What's your opinion of that?
The cartoon is intended to be humorous. It's a joke. Now, the sexual part in this cartoon is of little importance.
Of little importance?
The sexual part is of little importance. The main point about this is that Rupert is behaving in a way that one wouldn't expect a little bear to behave.
What sort of age is Rupert, to your mind? What sort of age, Bear?
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm not up to date with bears.
Oh, you don't have to be, because Rupert doesn't change, does he?
I think the question is, what age do you think is Rupert intended to be? Child, adult, or what?
Well, it's an unreal question. You might as well ask me, how old is Jupiter?
He's a young bear, isn't he? He goes to school. That's right, isn't it?
I don't know whether he went to school or not. I'm sorry, but I'm obviously not as well informed as you are about little bears. I'm a psychologist. But your treatment of this magazine is absurd, if I may say so. People do not read a magazine like this as if it were a legal document, as if it were a research report. They read it, it has some minor effect, and then they forget it. And to go through it inch by inch, line by line, in the way that you do, makes no more sense than if you were to go through any other magazine in this way. You are judging it by a standard that doesn't make sense. The Rupert Bear cartoon is intended to be humorous. It's a joke. It may not be a very good joke, but I maintain that even the funniest joke in the world would not, after you, Mr. Leary, had finished with it, be very funny.
Well, be that as it may. We've seen throughout, have we not, turning to the pages of this magazine, that it does precisely what I suggested it does. That is, relentlessly promote some elements of the new culture, dope, rock and roll, and fucking in the streets.
And what it does promote is change. And this is what people are frightened of. This is what people are calling a corrupting influence.
Dr. Klein, you tell us you're a director of Goldsmiths College and a lecturer in psychology at Birmingham University. Now, we know you as a doctor, but we don't know, apart from your doctor, whether it's Miss or Mrs.
It's Miss.
I see. So we have no children of our own.
No, I haven't got children, but I'm a teacher of children.
What sort of age group do you think this magazine would appeal to?
Well, just seeing on the outside school kids issue would put a number of people off. Most people school age don't like to be called school kids and wouldn't be particularly encouraged to buy something because it said school kids on the outside. I didn't examine the cover in photoscopic detail. I just thought how nice it would do for bathroom wallpaper.
Oh, really, Doctor?
Yes, a pretty picture over and over again makes a nice pattern with pretty shapes.
Do you really want to see those pictures in your bathroom?
Well, you have to remember that it isn't immediately obvious that they are lesbian. When I first saw it, it was a pretty cover. The blue is the kind of blue that you do have in kitchens and bathrooms.
Have you ever heard the expression blue films?
Yes.
And are you going to tell us, really, that it escaped your notice that the cover of this magazine depicts couples, naked couples, 2 by 2, having it off in a lesbian fashion, and that's what you want to see on your bathroom wall? You notice that the girl in the extreme left is wearing a dildo?
Yes, since you pointed out.
Did that also escape you?
Yes, it did.
I see.
Is your eyesight good? Reasonably good.
I think you have to be in a place like a law court to look at these things so microscopically. Either that or sick in the head to go into it as deep as you are doing.
Actually, there's something in the girl on the right's pubic region, is there not? It is not her hand.
Yes.
Did you notice that before?
I had it pointed out to me.
Did that also puzzle you?
Yes.
Worked out what it is?
I think there was a newspaper report which said it is a rat's tail.
And does it seem to you that it could very well be a rat's tail?
It would have to be a very small rat. Where is the rest of the rat?
Up her vagina.
It would have to be a very large vagina. You know, this is really a bit silly. This is what I mean about sick minds. This is not a proper discussion.
Well, what is it then? I'm simply asking what it is if it be not a rat's tail.
To me, it's just a pretty cover. There is no need to put it through the mangle 50 times.
Have you any experience with pornography?
Would you like to give some examples?
No, I'm asking you, Doctor, have you any experience of pornography?
Would you like to define for me?
I'm asking a simple question, Doctor.
I think I must ask you what the definition is in this court of pornography. I think I am entitled to ask that.
The answer to your question is either yes or no, or I don't know.
That is my answer.
She doesn't know because she doesn't understand the question.
Dr. Edward de Bono, you're a lecturer at Cambridge University and the author of a number of books on a thought process you've identified as lateral thinking. Perhaps you'd tell us, Doctor, what do you think would be the likely effects of the publication of Oz magazine?
Oz serves a very useful purpose in the hippie subculture because it provides a window into the minds of a significant section of society, whether one likes it or not. It is also a very effective way of communicating with that subculture. It is a window, and I don't think windows create scenes. They're merely something you look through.
Just look at this cartoon, if you will, on page 10, which shows a schoolmaster masturbating. Now, it's a fairly common occurrence in magistrates' courts that dirty old men in Macintoshes suddenly pull open the front of their Macintoshes to reveal themselves to young girls.
Yes, I accept that that is a common offence.
Don't you agree it affects their minds and their attitudes towards sex?
It tends to have a negative effect. But the potential of this Oz picture for tending to put people off sex is only about 30% of that of the average sermon in any church, which I think you would not consider to be harmful.
Mr. de Bono, please, let us not bring the pulpit into this.
Oh, no, my lord, we mustn't prevent Mr. de Bono from bringing anything into this.
Oh, no, but it's a long jump, is it not, from the dirty old man in a Macintosh to a pulpit?
It's no jump at all when Mr. Leary is suggesting that putting people off sex is harmful. And my remark was that there are lots of situations in life that have the purpose of putting us off sex.
I'm suggesting that the mental shock to a young girl of seeing a man suddenly exposing himself to her could well be damaging.
I think the mental shock of being told that you are going to be burned for eternity is equally damaging.
Why did you mention the church pulpit? In particular, the sermon from the church pulpit?
Because, my lord, the impression I was being left with by Mr. Leary was that this picture is putting people off sex. And that was in some way peculiar to Oz and peculiarly harmful in Oz. I was putting it in the general context that a lot of our structure, our emphasis in society, is to put people off sex. And I was using the extreme case to cover the ground in between.
Now, what do you suppose the effect is intended to be of equipping Rupert Bear with such a large-sized organ?
I don't know enough about bears to know their exact proportions. I imagine their organs are hidden in their fur. But if you had a realistic drawing, I think you would miss the point of the drawing entirely.
Mr. de Bono, why is Rupert Bear equipped with such a large organ?
What size do you think would be natural?
Well, forgive me, but you mustn't ask counsel questions.
Aren't these cartoons really like drawings on lavatory walls?
You would probably spend longer looking at them if they were.
Yes, but the difference between lavatory walls and this publication is that this is in print.
I would say that the difference was that the lavatory wall you would associate with necessity, and this is a matter of choice. Both are expressions of a certain rudeness, not uncommon among schoolboys, and that it has no more significance than that.
But lavatory walls are only available for those people who wish to use the lavatory for purposes of nature, whereas this magazine has a circulation, as we're told, that some might put at 40,000.
I find that question difficult to answer, Mr. Leary. Unless I knew the turnover of a normal lavatory wall, I would expect it probably to be in excess of 30,000.
What, one lavatory? 30,000?
If you stop to calculate it, I expect so.
I'm thinking of school kids. Population in public where they are artistic fucking walls. King Alex Callow wearing an artificial male phallus.
I'd like to call John Peel. John, you now have a popular radio program on the BBC, but you began by working for Radio London. It was one of the ship radio stations, wasn't it?
Yes.
Radio London, a ship.
It was one of the pirate radio stations.
I see.
John, could you turn to the article on page 22, Brown Shoes Don't Make It? The paragraph, then came 1967, and the great flower power summer. Suddenly, every other kid was belled and caftaned and chanting, "All you need is love." I thought we'd really won. We'd enchanted and infiltrated them and genuinely convinced them that love was where it was at and not battling. I was wondering if you could tell us what you think the author is trying to say.
Well, obviously 1967 was a period of great optimism for him. And for me, and for you too, I assume. I mean, I really thought there was going to be a lot of social change. People were beginning to think about one another rather than just acquiring property. This turned out not to be the case, unfortunately.
Mr. Peel, how did you come to be here today?
On my bicycle.
No, I was asking about your motivation for being here.
Oh, well, I came about Oz, and I was asked to give evidence about its significance to popular music.
Well, then let's look at this article by Master Charles Shaw Murray, which refers to straightforward fuck music. Now, is there a type of music, what one might call mood music, which assists young people to get to know one another sexually?
You mean the type advocated by magazines like Playboy? The sort of silver strings that you're supposed to play when you take people up to see the etchings, or whatever other cliché is supposed to assist in the business of seduction. Well, I must say, I've never tried using that type of music myself.
Sexuality was one of the elements introduced into music on the pop scene by Mr. Elvis Presley during the rock and roll era, wasn't it?
Well, I'm sure sex has always been important in music, sort of right back to the earliest dance days, because a lot of early music was for things like fertility ceremonies. I'm sure if you were to do a scholarly study of it, which I wouldn't be capable of, I think you'd find that there was a sexual element in music sort of right back to the early days.
Yes, but you've not yet heard of a criticism, have you, of Mozart or Beethoven, which deals with somebody having an orgasm over it?
Well, I must admit I've never read sexual climaxes into the music of Mozart or Beethoven. But I mean, if I wrote music, I'd be flattered to think that people were making love to that music.
Yes. I see you use the expression making love.
Yes.
So we take it that you would find it in bad taste to use the phrase fuck rather than making love. Which would you prefer?
Well, the expressions are not different. I mean, you can mean either one in the context. I mean, I just felt because I was in court I should say making love, but everybody else seems to be saying fuck, so I shall say fuck as well.
Now, I was just wondering why you yourself chose the phrase making love, whereas the critic chose fucking. You say there's really no difference.
If I'd been anywhere other than in court, I would have said fucking.
I see. And on the air?
No, not on the air, because there would have been a number of complaints.
I wonder if you could just help us about yourself. You have no children of your own.
No.
You married?
Yes.
Have you had venereal disease?
Yes.
Let me ask you about this, not because I'm wishing to be personal, but because it's a matter that you broadcast about.
Could I explain why?
Am I right in suggesting that you thought it right to announce over the air, so that anybody listening in could hear it, that you unhappily had contracted venereal disease?
Yes, and I would do the same thing again today. I mean, I had it, and I wish that I didn't, but the BBC had prepared a programme for broadcasting on Radio 4 about venereal disease, and about the fact that some people are not prepared to admit that they have it, and I was asked to participate. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that quite a few people in the courtroom have had venereal disease. Whether they'd be prepared to admit it or not, I don't know.
Well, just forgive me for a moment, will you? It is so terribly easy to say a thing like that, but what does it mean?
Well, according to the doctors who did the programme, a great number of people in all walks of society suffer from venereal disease, and the main problem they have in trying to combat the disease is that people are not prepared to admit that they've got it, or at least, I mean, they're not prepared to discuss it openly.
When you commented that you dare say a number of people in this courtroom had had it and not mentioned it, which part of the courtroom had you in mind?
Well, I should say all parts of the courtroom.
You were serious?
Yes, it is a very common disease.
Let's go on to another topic, Mr. Leary.
Yes, I wonder if I could ask a few more questions.
No, well, I don't think so. A very great accusation about the people in this court has been made. I see no point in pursuing it. If the witness wishes to persist in it, he's perfectly entitled to do so, I suppose.
Well, I didn't bring it up in the first place.
Felix Topolsky, you were the official war artist during the Second World War, and your work hangs in the V&A Museum, the British Museum, the Imperial War Museum, the Tate Gallery, to name but a few. What part does Oz magazine play in promoting art?
A very useful part. I've been looking through Oz and buying Oz since it started. It's an inventive paper which has introduced a completely new graphic approach.
And what do you think of the Rupert the Bear cartoon?
Ah, yes. Now, this to me is tremendously clever, tremendously witty. The putting together of the opposite elements in the comic culture and creating a riotous clash. I think it is a great invention, if one accepts its satirical basis.
What we're looking at here is a new Andy Warhol?
Well, it works in that direction. There is a statement by Arthur Koestler which comes to my mind. Unexpected elements brought together produce an act of creation.
Could you help us as to whether Rupert on his own, as he appears in his annual, as he appears in the National Daily, is that art?
Well, he's here a symbol of a certain state of mind, and when in the central position of the page...
No, Mr. Topolsky, you haven't understood. What learned counsel is asking you is, suppose you went into a bookshop and bought the Rupert Annual to give to someone as a present. Would you regard that as art?
Not I personally, but many would probably. But I have to add that in this case, we are not facing Rupert alone.
Do you agree that Rupert, as he appears in the Daily Strip in the National Daily and in the Rupert Annual, is not art?
Not to me.
But you say bringing the two together makes it different?
Yes.
Does it make it art, in your opinion?
It makes it satirical art.
Satirical art. See? And the fabulous furry freak brothers on the following page. Art?
Well, I remember there was a famous essay on strip cartoons which treated them seriously as a form of art which showed the social situation.
No, we're wanting your opinion, Mr. Topolsky, if you please. Is the strip cartoon, in your opinion, art or not?
Strip cartoon art?
But what does that mean?
I think we should accept that any visual performance, if executed in earnest, is a branch of artistic creation. The assessment as to whether it is good or bad is changeable. A few years ago, pop art wouldn't have occurred to us as a serious art, yet now it is.
So, as you define art, it can comprehend everything from Mickey Mouse to Rembrandt.
Indeed, yes.
And take in any satirical drawing, however ill executed, is that right?
Yes. But I must remind you, this is a school children's issue, which has a large proportion of material which is immensely interesting precisely because it is produced by school children.
Ronald Dworkin, you are Professor of Jurisprudence at New York University, and I think that 2 years ago, in 1969, you were appointed Professor of Jurisprudence at Oxford University.
Yes.
You then succeeded the eminent legal philosopher H.L.A. Hart.
Yes. Who?
H.L.A. Hart.
How do you spell it?
Well, H-A-R-T. The initials are H-L-A, and he's the former Oxford Professor of Jurisprudence. Even I've read some of his books. I think he's quite well known. Have you seen a copy of Oz 28, Professor Dworkin?
Yes, I have.
Given your expertise in questions of legal morality, may I ask you whether you think that Oz does in fact deprave or corrupt public morality?
That's a very complicated question. If you were to take one particular person in whose life morality played a considerable role and changed him into a person who acted out of selfishness or out of motives that showed no concern for the feelings of other people, then I would say you had corrupted that person's morality. It seems to be quite obvious that this magazine does not corrupt morality in that sense. Indeed, the movement of which this magazine forms a part takes as its end to increase the role that morality plays in public and private behavior. You may not like the language in which it's put, you may not like the style, but certainly one of the messages is to encourage a greater role for morality in our daily lives. It's important to remember that morality includes a concern for toleration and freedom of expression. These are values which are terribly important. In my opinion, the publication of this magazine is a way of vindicating this toleration. Although we may not approve of some of the articles.
This is not a lecture theatre.
Do you think this case would succeed in the U.S. courts?
How can the witness possibly answer when he hasn't heard any of the evidence?
Well, Your Lordship, I only asked because I noticed in the Times that Lord Hailsham, the Lord Chancellor, and Chief Justice Warren Burger said that the courts of this country and of the United States have a great deal to learn from each other.
If you think you can ask that question, well, go ahead and ask it.
Do you think that this prosecution would succeed in the United States of America?
If Your Lordship will not... I am not familiar with all the evidence, but I have read the magazine, and I believe this prosecution would be unconstitutional in the United States by virtue of the First Amendment, which prohibits the infringement of the freedom of speech.
Thank you.
Do you want to ask any questions, Mr. Leary?
I hope the court will understand if I desist from asking this witness's opinions.
Homosexuals live on
What part does Oz play in
the theatre
depraved and corrupted by the extreme?
What sort of age band?
My lord, my last witness is Mr. Marty Feldman, the comedian and scriptwriter of Educating Archie, Round the Horn, That Was the Week That Was, and of course, The Marty Feldman Show.
No, it's okay.
The witness does not want to take an oath, my lord.
Just ask me your questions. I'll answer any questions.
Mr. Feldman, if you wish to give evidence in court in this country, the Crown says you must either take the oath of any religion which you happen to practice, or if you don't practice a religion, you can do what is called affirming. This means exactly the same thing in law, that you're bound to tell the truth.
Okay, I'll affirm.
You wish to affirm. Very well, this will be explained to you. Oh, just a moment. Before you do that, why do you wish to affirm?
I think there are more obscene things in the Bible than in this issue of Oz.
That's not what I wanted to hear. You don't practice any religion.
I have my own religion.
Mr. Feldman, please, we have been here 5 weeks.
I, Marty Feldman, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Mr. Feldman, you've been called as an expert witness to testify as to the satirical and humorous qualities of Oz. The cartoon on page 10 of the schoolmaster masturbating has come in for much criticism. Do you consider it fair game?
I knew a headmaster who looked exactly like this. This is fair game, yes. Quite a lot of us, as children, no sadistic masters at school. I think a child has a right to record this.
I don't know if it matters, but I can't hear what the witness is saying.
Well, I think it matters. Shall I say it louder?
It's been suggested that the fabulous furry Freak Brothers would encourage violence.
As opposed to Tom and Jerry cartoons which can't encourage violence, or Terry Gilliam cartoons on the Monty Python show. I think there is a lot of violence in all cartoons, but it's harmless violence. It's cathartic. Certainly doesn't encourage readers to go out and kill anybody.
And what about Rupert?
Seems to me the establishment are getting uptight about Rupert because Rupert in some ways represents their own childhood. The establishment's being attacked. In a dictatorship, one of the first things they try to do is outlaw ridicule. Hitler did this and Franco did this. And there are some who are trying to do this today. Anyway, comedy is personal. What makes you laugh doesn't necessarily make me laugh. So I don't think any subject ought to be outlawed. If you can discuss a subject seriously, then you ought to be able to discuss it humorously, especially at school. I mean, we're all at school. Probably even the judge here. Am I speaking loud enough for you, Judge? Oh, sorry. Am I waking you up?
Mr. Feldman, you did comment that there was more obscenity in the Bible than in this issue of Oz.
Yes. The Old Testament is vicious, vengeful. Not a good thing for children to read.
Have you another witness, Mr. Neville?
Oh, is that it then?
The judge pretended I wasn't there, the boring old fart.
Mr. Dennis, you appreciate, do you not, that your views on what is indecent and obscene differ from those which other people hold?
Yeah, that's one of the elements of democracy, if I understand it.
One of the what?
One of the elements of democracy.
You did your best, did you not, to provide an erotic cover for your magazine?
I've seen that cover too many times now to give you an honest evaluation as to whether it's erotic or not. It's been reproduced from a book on public sale about the work of a French artist, Bertrand.
There's no attempt was made to change that phallus on the front when you removed it, lifted it, from Monsieur Bertrand's book of drawings.
Change the phallus, Mr. Leary?
Yes.
Well, no, of course no attempt was made to change the phallus. We're not printing the Daily Telegraph, are we?
Didn't that attitude get you into trouble with the printers?
Absolutely. After a few months, our first printers told us they no longer wished to continue because Oz had received publicity in the news of the world. The director of that company, Mr. Woodrow Wyatt, who was a politician, couldn't afford to have his name associated in any way with a publication such as Oz. There was one printer I went to see who, without even seeing an issue, said it would be impossible for him to print Oz. So I said, why, when you haven't even seen an issue yet? How do you know whether you've got the capability to print it or not? I was talking in terms of technicalities, you understand. I said, I'm sure your machinery is good enough, and he said, no. I don't think it would be possible for us to print Oz because, you see, we're far too near the palace. Well, I shook my head.
Wait a minute. Can we keep the royal family out of this, do you think? We haven't succeeded in keeping many people out of it yet.
Sorry, Your Honour, I'm just trying
That's all right. Let's just go on to another point, Mr. Leary.
I want to ask you about those small ads.
Yeah.
Yes, gay men are invited to send £3 for our new magazine, Iron Boys. This uncensored magazine from Sweden shows scenes never published before, covering every angle of love. Dare to pander to the lusts of homosexuals?
Mr. Leary, I find that phrase repulsive. Would you please rephrase your question?
No, certainly not.
Certainly not. Just answer it, that's all. You can comment if you wish. What's your answer?
No, in my opinion, it is not pandering to the lusts of homosexuals.
Well, how would you put it? Assisting perverts to get a thrill, a sexual thrill, out of thumbing through photographs never published before, covering every angle of homosexual sex?
Is that a question, Mr. Leary? If it is, I must say that I can't accept your phrase, perverts.
Well, what phrase would you like to use?
Well, if you wish to use the phrase homosexuals, it would be much more to my liking. Your constant insistence that homosexuality is a perversion, well, it's not, in my opinion.
Is it right that Oz has relentlessly promoted some elements of the new culture, dope, rock and roll, and fucking in the streets.
Is it right, in my opinion, that this particular issue, or all issues of Oz, have relentlessly promoted that,
You
Mr.
heard
Leary?
what I said, I'll say it again, that Oz has relentlessly promoted some elements of the new culture. Dope, rock and roll, and fucking in the streets.
No. That is an opinion with which I would not agree.
Because that's just about the size of it, isn't it?
Sorry?
Just about the size of it, isn't it?
Size of what, Mr. Leary?
My lord, members of the jury, those accused men agreed to publish a magazine which would carry, as it had carried before, the banner of the Alternative Society. Look at this magazine and ask yourselves, what alternatives are there? Dropping out of society, expecting the state to provide. By the state, I mean nothing more than you and me. Those of us who do not mind working, those of us who think it right to work, those of us whom advocates of the Alternative Society might describe as those foolish enough to work. It puts forward as a way of life, does this Alternative Society, sex as being something to be worshipped for itself, until you reach the ultimate state called fucking in the streets. Why, I wonder, have we heard nothing of love? Right at the outset, Detective Inspector Luff told us that he felt personally that Oz was undesirable from a family point of view. Members of the jury, that is a consideration for you to think about. Because it is not right to sneer at accepted values and to destroy everything that we believed until now. The question you might like to ask yourselves when you go out to consider your verdict in this case is not, would I like my children to see this? Because no doubt your own children come from very nice homes where they can discuss properly questions about love, sex, and the danger of taking drugs. Ask yourselves rather, would I like my neighbor's children to see this particular magazine? Because when all is said and done, morality is essential to the health of a community such as ours. And it is up to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to set the moral standard by which we shall continue to live in this country.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have sat here, well, the best part of the summer has passed us by. Wimbledon tournaments have come and gone. The Royal Birkdale has passed us. We've almost entered the common market. Whilst we've sat here and turned over and over again the pages of a little underground magazine, and done it so often we may feel the fabulous, furry freak brothers have entered our sleeping as well as our waking hours. A huge quantity of public time and money has been spent in ardent and eager pursuit of what? A schoolboy prank. In pursuit of that prank, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to squash a rather unsuccessful number of a little underground magazine, to gag a little cheeky criticism, to suppress some lavatory humor and some adolescent discussion of sex and drugs, we have had rolled out before us the great, majestic engine of the criminal law. One may be tempted to feel that the prosecution in this case is like a nervous public official who, when a small child sticks its tongue out at him in the street, calls out the army. As we burrow into Oz number 28, as we begin to scrutinize it as if it were a bill of sale or an act of parliament, as we reach for our magnifying glasses and peer for the 100th time at Rupert the Bear, are we not in danger as lawyers of making the law look a little foolish? Are we not in danger of losing our legal minds in a maze of cross-examination? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we heard a lot in the last speech about the alternative society. The truth of the matter is, this country contains many alternative societies. And the most important thing is that we must learn to live with each other and be tolerant of the alternative ideas we may have, and not stifle each other's ideas and lifestyles. What is finally important in this case is the relationship between parents and children. In that relationship, the important thing is tolerance and understanding. The importance is for us all to be able to say what we feel. If, in putting forth their feelings, however mistakenly, however clumsily, children find that our reaction is to trundle out the law, to attack and suppress and censor, there is a danger that they will shrug their shoulders and smile and turn away from us. And then we shall be a lonely generation, because we shall have lost them forever.
Sitting in the court for 5 weeks, listening to the allegations made by the prosecution, and in particular to some of the observations from the judge, I have felt at times as though I got caught up in one of Doctor Who's time machines, that I'd been transported back through the years to a wonderland of wigs and starched collars, of liveried courtiers and secret passageways, that I'd been deposited amidst an eternal antique stage play in which, at regular intervals, everyone bowed to the leading man, and tiny illustrations in a magazine were endlessly scrutinized for hidden meanings, and people talked as though the outside world stood still. One of the strangest and most menacing of all the allegations leveled throughout this trial is that we are part of a community without love. Sex is worshipped for its own sake, said Mr. Leary, who went on to ask, why have we heard nothing about love? Well, I suspect the kind of love that Mr. Leary was searching for in Oz consists of violins and moonlit terraces, of tuxedos, lace handkerchiefs, and E-type Jaguars, the sort of world characterized by those novels of Barbara Cartland, where dashing young bucks cannot afford to kiss the satined debutante until marriage. I mean, to reject that sort of love is not to reject love at all, but to reject a myth, or an image of love which is not only unattainable, but in the guise of ennobling women actually enslaves them. I think that what Oz, or at least the community of which Oz is a part, is trying to do is to redefine love, to broaden it, so that it can become a force of release and not one of entrapment. I remember 10 years ago, Bob Dylan wrote about the very thing that some of our witnesses have warned us about in this court. The danger of polarization. The danger that society will be forced into two mutually uncomprehending and hostile extremes. The danger that the tension between the generations will become so extreme that it will lead to a complete breakdown in communication. Dylan sang, "Come, mothers and fathers throughout the land, don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one if you can't lend a hand, for the times they are a-changing." Will you lend a hand, members of the jury?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we now approach the last stages of this trial. These three accused are charged, firstly, with a conspiracy to corrupt public morals, secondly, with contravening the Obscene Publications Act, and thirdly, with sending indecent material through the post. Another example to help you with indecency is this. Let us say you attend an athletic or stage event and the athletes, beautiful physical creatures, male or female, haven't got clothing which fits properly. And as they compete or as they appear on the stage, you can see their private parts. That is immodest and indecent in this country. One of the points you may wish to consider, ladies and gentlemen, is whenever certain people see something stable, automatically they wish to attack it, upset it, have a go at it. It's perfectly all right, of course, to dissent and differ. What about the methods used here? So now we come to that great number of people who call themselves experts. This is not a trial by experts. This is a trial by jury. It's entirely a matter for you, ladies and gentlemen. But you may think that eventually most of these so-called experts either had to admit the magazine was obscene or else tell lies. We had Mr. George Melly, who told us he was an atheist and affirmed. Very verbose he was. He mentioned cunnilingus. And again, I wonder how many of you, ladies and gentlemen, have heard words like that before you came into this court. Then there was Miss Caroline Coon. She sounded, you may think, like an old-fashioned English imperialist. Conditions in the Middle East, she said, are not relevant to any problems in our country. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there are all these nations. They have 30 generations at least of experience of pot, Iraq, Iran, so on, so on. I suppose at one time you might have considered them second-rate nations and referred to them in scathing terms, but not now, do we? Miss Coon says, hash and pot may have destroyed other nations, but that's not relevant to us at all. What Miss Coon's views on fucking in the streets are, we don't know. Perhaps it's just as well. She seemed to me, if I may say so, a very nice girl. It was only after her that we got down to the rather more sordid side of this case. We had a Dr. Schofield, a psychologist, who gave evidence about the fabulous furry freak brothers. If you think that cartoon was in any way edifying, well, find it so. But of course, we had the gang of pig fuckers and the knives and so on. I mean, there it is. There it is. I say emphatically, said Dr. Schofield, that none of the drawings in Oz would have any harmful effect on school children. I cannot put it more strongly than that, can I? There is a defense point for you. I read it out from my notes here. Do you believe, Dr. Schofield, ladies and gentlemen? Do you? Then we had Dr. Josephine Klein, a lady of Dutch birth. She affirmed. Whenever she was asked a question which appeared to be perfectly simple, she would say, I must be very careful what she would think. You remember, she was asked about pornography. Did she have any experience of pornography? After a very long time, she was unable to reply to this very simple question. Now, if you find her evidence totally incredible or that she was being evasive, you are quite entitled to do so. And so we come to Mr. De Bono, a gentleman from Malta. Now, he is a doctor and invented a new system of thinking called lateral thinking. The only thing he didn't lack was self-confidence. Are you a world figure in the field of thought, he was asked. Yes, I am, he replied. Oz 28, he said, makes sex into a caricature. Finally, he said, Oz was a window in the world of the hippie culture. Well, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes that window needs cleaning. Then we heard from John Peel, who gave evidence about fuck music. I use the word fuck because I'm in court, he said. On the radio, it would not be allowed. Then Mr. Topolsky, the difficulty of accepting what he has said is this. He claimed that any visual drawing done earnestly is art. Possibly, he added. Possibly. But is it art? it is. There it is. Then we had Mr. Dworkin, a professor of jurisprudence, no less. He was brief, fortunately. He gave us a lecture on morals, which I'm sure was of great benefit to all who listened to it. This prosecution, he said, will be unconstitutional in the United States. Well, we are not as yet an adjunct of the United States, so you can attach what weight to his evidence that you wish. Finally, we had Mr. Marty Feldman. He affirmed. He said the Bible was obscene. Mention of the Bible from that witness reminds me of the saying of Jesus in Matthew. But whosoever shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, that he were drowned in the depths of the sea. Mr. Richard Neville claimed that this was a political prosecution. It was harassing the alternative lifestyle. I do not quite know what Mr. Neville means by political prosecution, or whether you take it very seriously. But if he means that a political party has initiated this prosecution, the decision to prosecute would appear to have been taken by the previous and endorsed by the present government. So you may think that his claim that this was a political prosecution was ludicrous. Now, will you please retire to consider your verdict? Ladies and gentlemen, you've asked for assistance on the meaning of the word obscene. May I remind you of the dictionary definition? It means repulsive, filthy, loathsome, indecent, or lewd, or any one of these things. Because the case has been very long, there's been a great deal of evidence. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a difficult case. Would you go back to your room, please, and try again?
Will the foreman please stand? Have you reached a verdict upon which you're all agreed?
No, sir.
Have you reached a verdict upon which at least 10 of you are agreed?
Yes.
On the count charging the defendants with conspiring to corrupt public morals, how say you? Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On the count charging the defendants with publishing an obscene article?
Guilty.
Though the results have nothing to do with me, may I say how much I agree with your verdict? Inspector Love, have deportation papers been served on Richard Neville?
They have, sir.
I shall not pass sentence till I've seen prison, medical, and psychiatric reports on these men. They will be remanded in custody for this to be done.
Our Lord, it really is inhuman to keep them in suspense any longer.
These reports are a lot of bureaucratic nonsense, as you well know.
I refuse to accede to your request. Take them down.
I feel it was a fair trial until the summing up, when I really must say that our case became unrecognizable in your mouth. Witness after witness proved beyond any doubt that our magazine did no harm, but you failed to make that clear to the jury. I asked myself while I was at Wandsworth Prison, was this done out of malice? And I felt that it was not. I feel rather that you acted out of a lack of understanding. If you jail us, you will show the world that your generation, while it appears to listen with every courtesy, is in fact deaf.
Prison officer, I'm going to pass sentence in this case now. I quite accept that these three accused are comparatively poor men. A fine, therefore, in any event, is inappropriate. It follows, therefore, that the sentence of the court must be a custodial one. Richard Neville, stand up, would you please? You have very great ability and very great intelligence, but in view of everything I've heard, I'm afraid I have no option but to sentence you to prison for 15 months. The court recommends you for deportation. Jailer, take him down.
Well, that was predictable.
James Anderson, will you stand up, please? You're a member of the Australian Bar, a man of previous good character, and your case has given me the greatest difficulty and concern. Unfortunately, I have a public duty to perform. The sentence of the court is 12 months imprisonment. Take him down. Felix Dennis, stand up, will you please? You are younger than the other two, and very much less intelligent. The sentence of the court is 9 months imprisonment. Take him down.
I'm very sorry you had to do that.
May I say that so far as there have been any attacks on me and my conduct at the trial, I personally ignore these attacks. That is a matter for the Court of Appeal at a later stage.